I don't think there's any advice I can give to. I mean, the guy won a lot of Olympias, right? He won more than me. He was second to me. You know, he's been great since the beginning. He's third in his first Mr. Olympia in 2008. You know, he works with Hani, and Hani, they I'm sure had a game plan to prepare him to come back. The only indifference is, you know, he's been sitting out now a lot longer than I did. I mean, I came back the next year.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talk about ring rust with boxers and that kind of stuff. I don't know, you know, with bodybuilding, I can tell you, Dave, when I sat out 2012 after losing in 11, tearing the bicep, and I came back in 13, and let's be realistic, I was a shadow of myself, right?
Yeah.
So to come out and realize what real life is, and you've experienced this now being off the stages and you know, turning your life into something else, you kind of realize around you, hey, there's a lot more than this. And I'm really surprised Phil Heath came back.
Really?
Because I thought once he sat and took on real life things that he probably never had prior to, you know, worrying about the Olympia each year, because the day you win the Olympia, the next day you're already thinking about the next one, right?
Right.
So I think he'll, you know, he's got to have the mindset to come in. He can't worry about anyone else. He can't worry about the biggest factor is, oh, there's a returning champion. The returning champion is favored, right? I think this is the first time we've ever seen that for once the returning champion is not necessarily favored to win this contest. And that speaks volumes because of Phil Heath's physique. I mean, he's got it all. If the midsection's in play, he's good to go. I mean, I don't see anyone beating Phil Heath.
As you know, we know as bodybuilders age, things change about their bodies. You know, the elasticity of the skin is not as good. You know, the midsection seems to get a little bigger as we get older. You know, all these little things that go along with that. Do you think Phil still has the firepower, the tool set to win the Olympia at this point?
Absolutely. I mean, we've never seen muscle insertions, the way the skin lays on muscle, such as Phil Heath, the fibers. That's the difference. And you know, I think Brandon, if you want to compare, like, you know, Mr. Olympia and, you know, a former, like those two, and, you know, I could put Dexter Jackson there too, but, you know, Phil Heath, when he turns around, you know, from the back is where he can really dominate, from the calves to the hamstring, the striations, you know, and then the back double bicep we know is kind of unbeatable on that stage. So, you know, there's a lot of poses that Brandon can stand with him, but there's a lot from the side. Phil just has a lot of detail, Right.
Now, obviously, if Phil could, you know, you always said right in the beginning that Phil should play to his strengths, but, you know, is there this risk of Phil like looking at himself and saying, well, they're so super micro focused on my midsection, I got to come in tapered? And you know what happens when you do that, Jay? You can lose the wow and the roundness and the cartoonish if you come in too flat or too depleted. Is that a risk for Phil? Because then, you know, he obviously is not the widest guy on stage, and when he loses that wow, sometimes his physique doesn't quite look, you know, like we want it to look, so to speak.
Listen, there's a lot of variables, but I would imagine that he's kind of got this figured out. I think he definitely has to think about not trying to be overblown to come into this contest, because that's what caused, you know, the stomach to get a little pushy the last couple years. And then, you know, saw him lose. Everything else, I mean, if you really look at the physique besides the midsection in that contest, that's really, everything else was still a Mr. Olympia caliber, right? So I think, you know, he has to walk that line and just try not to overeat that last week. That's going to give him that push, but still hold enough fullness. And listen, he could sacrifice a little fullness, I think.
This is a very valid point. Do you think the internet and social media and YouTube and all these, you know, armchair analysts who were put, you know, with big followings, who are putting out the bubble gut and the midsection, you think that almost worked against Phil? Like, in other words, if that wasn't there and we were back in the 90s, would Phil have won that show?
Yeah, I think they weren't. I think, I'm not going to sit there and the judges called him after the show. There was an official that called him and said, Phil, hey, fix your stomach. I think he realized that in 17, the stomach was a little it was a little bit of an eyesore. And I compare it to my 07 to 08 issue where, you know, I came in off in 07, you know, I came in 08 and I wasn't 100, and that's when I lost to Dexter. It's just, it's kind of like, okay, you can show up one year and have a slight a slight miss of the mark, but if you come in the following year and you haven't fixed that issue, then you're going to get pushed off. And that show, honestly, Dave, I mean, I wasn't, like I said, I mean, Phil Heath was my guy, but he could have won that show. He could have won, and no one would have necessarily. I mean, what would people have done? Oh, he had an extended stomach. Has that happened before? Yes, of course it has. So
I've seen it with Dorian.
I'm not going to say
yeah.
it could have gone either way. It wasn't like it was 100%. You know, Sean Roden destroyed him. That wasn't the case.
Yeah.